Okie dokie, let's paint a regular old Union soldier today. Maybe a little more accessible and normal than my other two videos. This is a regular old Billy Yank. The run-of-the-mill color scheme, nothing too crazy. So let's get to it. I primed him in the normal way I usually do, just black and off-white zenithal. It's pretty heavy. I dry brushed the zenithal on because it's so cold right now that I couldn't go outside to actually prime. We're going to start with his trousers. The Federal Army issued out tens and tens of thousands of sky blue trousers, some dark blue trousers, but primarily the vast majority of regiments were being issued sky blue trousers, especially after the very early parts of the war, with some exceptions. So for this guy, we're going with a nice, just kind of mid-war, kind of 62, 63 time frame look, but really this color scheme covers the Federal Army for the entire war. The only thing specific about this guy, which I'll get into at some point, is that he's going to be representing a very specific regiment, based on his coat and what I do with his cap later. But for now, he's wearing just run-of-the-mill sky blue trousers. There can be slight variation in tone with these trousers, but don't go crazy with like electric blues and things like that. Generally, when a company was being issued uniforms, they'd be coming from the same supplier and the same depot, same manufacturer. So making sure these things are within the same bolt of cloth, for lack of a better term, will just make your guys look more accurate and better in the end. I'm also really, really sick right now, so I'm sure my voice sounds very nice to listen to, and not at all disgusting or congested or anything like that. Okay, we're moving on to his frock coat. You might remember from the civilian video, if you're a avid watcher of my 2 videos so far, well, 3 now, I guess. There were 3 types of general coat and jacket that civilian men were wearing. That directly translates to the military as well. The military were taking cues, for lack of a better term, off of the civilian world. So you have the dress coat or the frock coat that this guy's wearing here. That is the same thing as in civilian life, except there's no lapel. So just buttons all the way up to the front to the collar that's clasped with hook and eyes. It'll have cuff and collar trim directly corresponding to the branch of service that the soldier is in. So this guy is an infantryman. He'll have light blue cuff and collar trim. There were also heavy artillery regiments that were issued frock coats with red trim, etc., etc. So this guy's wearing the infantry frock coat, the infantry dress coat. Now, it's really important to note that while many soldiers were issued the dress coat over the course of the American Civil War, especially early on, the first couple of years, the overwhelming majority of the soldiers were issued and wore the fatigue blouse or the sack coat. So just like in civilian life, there was a sack coat or a fatigue blouse, which was intended for fatigue purposes, but became really the quintessential Union Civil War garment of the 1860s. Those were made in mass, much easier to produce. They were less fabric, cheaper fabric, more cost-effective, etc. It was a no-brainer for the Army to primarily issue those out. It's also worth noting that the Army also used mounted service jackets. Now, these would be the equivalent to a jacket in civilian life, so a shorter jacket that ends around the belly button, the waist. There were tons of these that were converted for infantry use. They're often called Schuylkill Arsenal jackets, but they're 1854 mounted service jackets that are converted. These were very popular with soldiers. You see them pop up throughout the war in various theaters and all sorts of regiments. So those are also fun. So if you've got miniatures wearing jackets, it's totally kosher to have them painted up as federal soldiers. And also I'll quickly mention that there were many specific state garments, like New York State jackets like this soldier's wearing here, that were produced and issued by states rather than the federal government. There were Illinois state jackets, all sorts of stuff like that. So there are some state-specific things if you want to get really crazy. And if you do some research on a regiment and you find out they had, state garments, there you go. You can find a suitable mini for them, I'm sure, on the tabletop. All right, I'm doing the base, same shtick as before. But let's keep talking about the clothes, I guess. So here are some reference photos, once again, of my silly, national park programs and film shoots and things like that over the years, but just to get an idea of what these guys would have looked like. These are, very trustworthy, very well researched uniforms and reproductions, so you get an idea of the general color palette. Something I think is very important to notice is that these blues are pretty dark. When painting miniatures, you do want to highlight up more, and I definitely did on this frock coat on this guy, but realistically, really try to stay away from the stuff getting too light, especially like teal. Anything like that is just not in the realm of possibility for an actual Civil War garment. And there are tons of originals of these things. I know I'm showing you reproduction photos because it's a lot of them together, but you can, contact museums to look at these if you really want to go nuts. You can just look up pictures online to get an idea of what original garments actually look like. If you have any questions, once again, shoot me a message on Instagram, and I'll chat about this with you until you get sick of it. And I just painted his cap the same blue as his frock coat. I just love a nice matching cap and coat. And his leathers, his backpack, his haversack, which is the bag that goes over his right shoulder onto his left hip, those are all black. They were either, the leathers are all black leather. The knapsack was a tarred linen or cotton bag, and same with the haversack. The haversack was tarred linen or cotton as well, but they all read black. Now we're going to move to his canteen sling. It's just a quick, nice pop of white, really, on the model. It's a very, very dark tones over the model, so having this nice little pop here is a good look. Canteen slings were cotton and leather. Leather canteen slings really were phased out over time with the Union Army for the more cost-effective cotton slings. Now there were dozens of manufacturers and types and everything of canteens and slings and all sorts of stuff like that. That doesn't read at all on the tabletop or on models, so any off-white will do for the canteen sling here. You can use like a really dark brown or a black for a leather sling, but really you can't go wrong with the classic cotton canteen sling. So that's that. So now I'm moving on to the brass. So his belt buckle, his breastplate, and his cartridge box plate and buttons are all brass. Something I forgot to do in this video, which I'm really upset about, is the tip of his bayonet scabbard should also have a brass finial. So I fixed it after I took the final photos and I painted that, but you'll never see it. But just know that the tip of the bayonet scabbard should have a brass finial as well. Once again, this is a Perry Mini, I should probably mention. I love the pose of this guy. He's properly holding his musket at shoulder arms. His fingers are even split in the correct way to hold it. It's really, an awesome depiction of an accurate arms position, which is very appreciated by weirdos and losers like me. Another fun nitpicky thing for Civil War miniatures, if you're painting companies or regiments, battalions, whatever, is that they really all should be at the same arms position, other than certain very specific situations. So an entire battalion would be advancing at right shoulder shift, for example, or shoulder arms like this guy is. You wouldn't see random arms positions in the ranks unless they're marching in column at route step. This is really getting in the weeds, but it always looks clean and nice, and it's appreciated, obviously, by people who care. When all your models look kind of exactly the same, which could seem boring, but to me it really makes it look like it should. Like they look professional, they look like they know what they're doing, and they look like the Civil War soldiers. And we're just doing some dry brushing on the base, giving some schmutz to his trousers and bottom of his coattails. Once again, just slowly building the textures and the levels of highlight and dinge to this guy. Going back after finishing his base and painting his shoes, his army booties, or his brogans, whatever you want to call them. Those are black leather once again, so the only reason I skipped them during the black stage of this was because I knew I was going to go back to dry brush the base. All right, we're more than halfway done with this guy. I'm going to bring out the old Pro Acryl black wash because it's a really nice way to get everything looking better. Gets in the crevices and all that jazz. Really, once again, this is a speed paint. I mean, I'm just doing the base colors, wash, building up the highlights, doing a couple details here and there to really make the model pop. But I would consider this a speed paint because this is how I do many multiple models at once. I usually paint 10 or so Civil War guys at once, and it's a great way to do that. Okay, now once the wash is dry, we're going to go back, and we forgot to paint his canteen. And when I say we forgot to, it means I forgot to. So the canteens were tin canteens. They were, metal, obviously, but the Federal Army almost always covered them with wool. So a lot of it was the same material as the Army blankets. They used wool flannel. Usually they were tones of brown, sometimes blues, but there's some pretty wild ones. There's some pretty out there examples that you can find if you really want to paint a couple wacky canteen covers. You can also leave some of them uncovered. Some of the dudes took the canteen covers off, or they deteriorated over time, that kind of stuff. So you can do some variations, look up original colors of Civil War canteens, look up original colors of Civil War blankets, and you'll get an idea of the color palette for them. And most importantly, I'm painting his beard, finally. No longer will he look like a weird old guy reenactor. He'll look like a very age-appropriate Civil War soldier. The average Civil War soldier was 26 years old, by the way. That number is skewed by the amount of teenagers who lied about being 18, but we can understand by rosters and all sorts of period accounts and photographs that they skewed pretty young. So I cannot stress this enough. Other than the photos that I sanctioned as being okay to look at, don't use reenactors as photo references because 9 times out of 10, arguably more than that, they are wrong because they're not usually historians, even though they want you to think they are. I actually mentioned this in my upcoming rulebook for my new Civil War combat game, Vortex of Hell. But if you want to look at reenactors who actually look like Civil War soldiers and have research, and you can read articles about uniforms and equipment on the website, if you go to libertyrifles.org, I'll try to remember to link it in the description below. You can see all sorts of color photos of original garments, reproduction garments, people wearing them. That is the only reenactment group in the entire world that I encourage you to trust just at face value. Also, it's just worth reading the research articles alone. It can definitely help you contextualize a lot of the stuff I'm talking about here and give you a little more in-depth understanding on what these guys were wearing and why they were wearing it. God, I sound awful. I realize I sound like I'm on the verge of tears for the last couple minutes. I think I'm just losing my voice faster than I thought I was going to. I don't know what's going on. I think I've got some sort of awful sickness. Anyway, so there's some contrast paint going on, the Gilliman flesh tone, I believe it is, just to give some nice depth to the skin tone there. And then we're just going to keep graduating to the highlights and keep building it up, just like the last miniature. This one looks a little better, though. The face is much more defined. I like to add a little red into my flesh tones, as you'll see, especially for the nose, cheeks, etc. But as this is a pretty quick skin tone paint job, the middle step of the wash with the contrast paint wash really does a lot of the heavy lifting to get into the creases and crevices, and then it's just, like I said, building up the Caucasian skin tones from here. I'm trying to think if there's anything I should mention about this guy that I haven't. I guess I can go over everything he's wearing so you've got a little bit of context as to what everything is. So he's got his waist belt on, and on the waist belt he's got his cap box on his right side. We're looking at it next to his gun right there. He's carrying I'm calling it an 1861 Springfield, but a Springfield or an Enfield, one of those. But also on his waist belt, on his left front hip, he's got his bayonet scabbard that's kind of tucked under his haversack, which is the black bag I was mentioning earlier. That is where he carries his rations and food and things like that. So that's the bag that hangs over his left hip. On top of that is the canteen, obviously for water. Every soldier was issued haversack and canteen. Everything I'm talking about in this guy's army issued. Every soldier would have been issued these. And then he's got his knapsack on his back, his 1858 double bag knapsack, and that would have, like I mentioned earlier, been painted cloth. And that's where he would carry his blanket, extra shirt, extra socks, the basics. And everything he's wearing, though, he's got his house on his back, essentially. I think I mentioned in one of my other videos a little bit about tentage, potentially. But this guy would have been carrying half of a tent, so he would have carried a shelter half, and then with a file partner, he would button those two halves together, and they would have a two-man tent. And that was the most common type of tent for federal soldiers, other than the A-frame or ironically, the common tent, which slept 4 to 6 guys, usually about 6 guys. But this guy, he's got everything on his back that he needs. We're gonna say he's from 1863, and he's got a shelter half in his backpack there. Anyway, but yeah, so the only other real equipment stuff he's got his shoes on, pants, frock coat, and cap. Everything else is unseen. And here I am painting his eyes. My favorite part of miniatures, genuinely. I really like painting miniatures' eyes because it takes a kind of tabletop standard paint job like this and really bumps it up to the next level. And everyone, people notice if you paint their eyes, if they actually look at your models, which sometimes doesn't really happen as much as we would like, I'm sure. But yeah, I love painting eyes. So having a nice face and a nice base is the best, in my opinion. Here I am dotting them in. This little black, soulless pupils. And he's getting there. He's almost done. We're getting to the finish line here. And right here, I'm just going back and adding some darker blue to his frock coat and his cap there. The color's fine, but I wanted to get a little darker because I think it got a little too bright in my excitement to highlight. So just some subtle darker blues into the crevices and the back of his cap and stuff. So just to beat that down a little bit. And right now I'm going to add the infantry piping that I was mentioning earlier. So on the cuff of these frock coats here, the dress coats, there would have been that chevron shape pointing up the sleeve, and that just denotes where the cuff ends, essentially. When the actual garment is constructed, it's just kind of on the top edge of the cuff. But anyway, that there would have been piping there, and then there would have been piping along the collar of the dress coats as well. So I'm kind of aggressively painting them in there. I didn't really do that good of a job, honestly, but it's okay. I think I go back later at some point. I don't know if it's on camera or not, but I clean these up just a little bit by adding more of the dark blue in. And here I'm trying to meticulously paint it in below his hair and above the collar, and it came out. It's fine. It's honestly fine. Now I'm going to jump in with the silver after I give him a once over, kind of give him a look here, making sure I'm not missing anything crazy. And we're just going to paint the basics of this musket, or this rifled musket, I should say. So next up, we're doing something that's pretty fun. I'll be painting his corps badge onto his cap. Every federal corps, so every Union Army corps, starting around the Battle of Chancellorsville, and certainly by the Battle of Gettysburg, which is what this guy will be depicting, had its own shape for their corps badge. So Army commanders could tell what grouping of regiments were over there versus what grouping of regiments were, next to them. For these corps badges, they were broken into divisions. So the first division would have been a red corps badge of the same shape. The second division would be a white corps badge, and the third division would be a blue corps badge. This little guy, for example, is depicting a soldier from the 3rd Corps, 3rd Division. And I suppose real quick, it's also worth noting that a corps is a collection of divisions, like I said, and a division, for the very basic terminology, it's a collection of regiments together. And a regiment is made up of 10 companies of men. On paper, companies were supposed to be 100 men. Therefore, a regiment would be 1,000 men, ideally. But by the time of the Battle of Gettysburg, or really any point in the Civil War, they would have been much smaller due to casualties, sickness, etc. And just for some context, in my game Vortex of Hell, you're commanding one company or a small battalion of 3 or so companies. So it's much more of a zoomed in effect rather than giant sprawling battles. Whatever. And here's a pretty wild little thing I decided to do last minute because a lot of regiments, a lot of guys did paint their knapsacks with their regimental numbers or their company letters and stuff like that. So I figured, why not be an absolute lunatic and paint this guy's knapsack with 111th New York State. I'm in a fugue state right now. The deeper I sink into this sickness, I forget if I mentioned this earlier, but the 111th New York State Infantry, they're one of my favorite regiments to research and learn about, and I figured this would be a really nice little fitting thing for this model, give them the extra pizzazz. The 111th New York, I'm depicting them as they would have looked at Gettysburg. They were still wearing frock coats at Gettysburg, but don't tell anyone, but they actually dropped their knapsacks before they went into battle. So this guy shouldn't have a knapsack on, but we're portraying them just prior to dropping their baggage. So there he is. The knapsack is pretty much done. I forget if I go back later and just kind of fix it up or anything, but I'm pretty happy with how that came out. As small as the numbers are, and as bad as the brush was that I was using. And right there, I was just adding a little more dinge with a dry brush and some sort of vague dirt dust color. Oh, here I am, going back and kind of fixing up the lettering on the pack a little more. I should have honestly just spent time looking through my brushes and finding one of my nice brushes that could have done that a lot better. But we are stuck with what we have. Okay, going to the basing, just classic static grass, nothing special. 2 tones of kind of dead grass and pretty vibrant grass there. Painting the base rim black. And that's it. That's pretty much it. Here he is. Here he is. A soldier from the 111th New York, 3rd Division, 3rd Corps, Army of the Potomac, as he would have appeared the morning of July 1st, 1863. What a glamour shot. What an almost in focus glamour shot that is. But yeah, thanks for listening to another video. I'm trying to hit a nice middle ground between, actual painting information and then the historical context of why I'm doing things the way I am and why the models look a certain way. So hopefully that's coming across a little bit and it's not too incredibly boring. Thanks.